Okay. So the poem, as above mentioned, is a prologue which talks about the helplessness of the poet of being miles away from his homeland, which he could not go back to. The vivid memories of the place, the Kashmir, which is embedded in the consciousness of Ali, which the poet brought himself to this alien land, which is USA, when he immigrated to USA, is growing in contrast to its current scenario. Now, the Kashmir, the memory of Kashmir, which Shahid has in his consciousness, is a past, and now the present condition of Kashmir is different. So the past, the memory of Kashmir, and the present, the real situation of the current situation of Kashmir, are actually in stark contrast with each other. So now when he receives a postcard from one of his friends or families, and he's holding the postcard, and he immediately becomes reminiscent of his past and his homeland. So he starts talking about it. So the very opening of the poem is gives you the very idea that it's very personal. So, holding a 4 by inch postcard that came from his homeland, nostalgia hits the poet, and looking at a mere half-inch postal stamp showing an image of Himalayas makes the poet acutely cognizant of his condition of being an exile. Now, all of you must have seen a postcard. The standard size of a postcard is 4 by 6 inch, and on top of the postcard you see this postal stamp, a small half-inch postal stamp that we get from the post office. So in those postal stamps we see images. Sometimes it could be of some prominent some eminent personality or some place. So the postcard that Shahid received, in that there was a postal stamp which was half an inch in size, and the image that was in that postal stamp was of Himalayas. So he said, okay, now Himalayas has shrunken in size for me. All I could see is just half-inch Himalayas, because the size of the postal stamp is half-inch, and therefore he says that, okay, now the whole memory, the entire Kashmir, my homeland, has shrunken in size. It has become the size of the postcard, because the only thing that he could touch and see and feel right now is the postcard. Therefore he becomes very nostalgic. So next, let's see. Okay, now let's begin with the analysis of the poem. So let me read the first 6 lines. Kashmir shrinks into my mailbox, my home, a neat 4 by 6 inches. I always loved neatness. Now I hold the half-inch Himalayas in my hand. This is home, and this is the closest I'll ever be to home. Okay. Now, in these lines, in this first 6 lines, what we could see is the nostalgia is accentuated by the memory, and in the in-betweenness of the poet, that he's in USA and he's not in Kashmir, but he's neither in USA nor in Kashmir physically, because although he is in USA, his mind is in Kashmir. So there's in betweenness. His position is of someone who is in between the two places. So nostalgia is accentuated by the memory, and the in-betweenness of the poet, his longing, gives impetus to his sense of exile. His sense of exile is even, heightened, has become more intense. The title of the poem is suggestive of the content of the poem. So we all know the content of the poem is about Kashmir, and the title, Postcard from Kashmir, gives the very idea what the poem would be about. The poet has received a postcard from Kashmir, through which he receives the information of the place and whereabouts of his family and friends. The opening lines strike a sense of loss of homeland and set the tone of the poem. Looking at the postcard from Kashmir, the poet expresses how distant he is from his homeland. So much so that his closeness with the postcard, which he is holding in his hand, is analogous to his physical proximity with the place. It simply means that the closeness between him, the postcard, and the postcard that he's holding is actually the suggestive of his closeness with his homeland, because this is how close he could be to his homeland. This is how helpless he is, because mm, all he could have is postcards from Kashmir, since he could not go back to Kashmir because the situations in Kashmir were not that pleasant at that time. He looks at the postcard and the postal stamp with the picture of Himalayas and notices how neat here means serene and beautiful, the picture is, and he always loved the neatness. By neatness here he means the beauty of his homeland. When I return, the colors won't be so brilliant. The Jhelum waters so clean, so ultramarine, my love so overexposed. Ultramarine means, deep blue color. So now the poet has, the memory of the poet has shifted to the space. Now he was talking about, before this, he was talking about the place in general, the Kashmir, his homeland. Now he has come to the landscape, the special aspects of the place. So he is thinking of the landscape. The poet now talks about the landscape of his homeland. He reminisces how clear and blue waters of Jhelum were. Now, even if he goes back to Kashmir, he won't find such pristine conditions of rivers and landscape of Kashmir. Now, the Jhelum water that he's talking about, he knows that although in his memory it is so, ultramarine, but if he goes back to Kashmir, he won't find it that ultramarine. So the Jhelum in his memory is now in stark contrast with the Jhelum which he would now see if he ever, goes to Kashmir. There would obviously be a change that he would notice. The place where one is born and raised informs one's identity, and going away from that renders an individual uprooted. Okay, now we should know that our identity is informed by one's placeness. Therefore, being a diaspora, one often experiences sense of loss. Now, wherever we live, suppose I live in Allahabad, you all also live in Allahabad. So if I move to northeast, or if I move to Kashmir for that matter, I'll miss Allahabad. And when I'll miss Allahabad, the memory of Allahabad won't be a floating memory, because memory has a place. So if I think of Allahabad and I'll miss Allahabad, I'll be thinking about, my college, my university. Okay, there I used to go and dine out with my family. There I used to hang out with my friends. So there is always a place in the memory. So that's why he's missing the homeland and also the landscape of Kashmir. Like I've talked about it, memory always has a place, a setting where events have taken place: birth, death, education, marriage, childhood, etc. Therefore, when the poet looks at the postcard, his consciousness reminisces of the landscape too. There's some uncertainty of how would he react to the changes that might have taken in the landscape of Kashmir. Okay, now we are coming to the last section of the poem. And my memory will be a little out of focus. In it, a giant negative, black and white, still undeveloped. So now in these lines, in these last 4 lines, the poet is cognizant, is aware of the fact that his memory and longing for the homeland is not going to change anything. In fact, the image and feelings of the homeland intact in his memory would be in stark contrast with its past, as things won't be the same in Kashmir. His undamaged memory of past would go out of focus when he'll face the reality, the present. The giant negative, which is metaphorical for the harmony he imagines for his landscape and homeland, will remain undeveloped. For his past and present could not be unified. So, like an undeveloped negative, a giant undeveloped negative, his memory of Kashmir, which he has in his consciousness, won't be aligned, won't be similar to what he will experience when he will go back to Kashmir and experience the place. It will be a changed place. Therefore, the past and the present cannot be unified, and therefore, the idea that Shahid has in his mind that probably if things could be the same, that won't happen ever. Therefore, this giant negative, this giant idea is going to remain undeveloped, is going to remain unrealized. So that is all for today. So we can talk in a line or two about the form of the poem. The poem is divided into 3 stanzas. First and third stanzas have 4 lines, and the second stanza has 6 lines, and the poem is written in free verse. Thank you. Have a good day.